Thanks for tuning into another Dolphins podcast. Week 8 is here, and Tua Tagovailoa is back as the Dolphins look to get back on track after dropping 4 of the last 5 games. Cap, I haven't seen you in a few weeks. How are we feeling entering Sunday's matchup?
I'm not sure I feel good about any matchup, to be honest with you. But look, I can't say it enough. I'm glad that we do the show on Friday because at least a little bit of optimism seeps in on Friday. You know, the game's only a few days away, and it's Friday. So, I mean, yeah, that's when we record the show. So, glad to be on here.
Josh is at field day with his kids, so he will not be joining us. So, we're asking Kat to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Kat, I did not get to be on the podcast with you last week, but I remember seeing you tweeting entering that Colts game. You were feeling pretty good, and there's a lot of hope, a lot of optimism that Tua Tagovailoa is going to give some juice to this lineup. But, man, the one thing I'm stuck on is, God, how is this team not 3-3 entering this matchup?
It's awful. And, you know, obviously the quarterback being gone, Tua being gone is the root of the problem. You know, I think we could be confidently sit here and say we'd be 3-3 or 4-2 if Tua were in the lineup. And I also would argue as well, Tua's got nobody to blame but himself for not sliding. Glad he's okay. Glad he's been cleared. Glad there's some optimism coming back, but it's just embarrassing. I mean, to be up 10-3 to a team where the quarterback Anthony Richardson has 5 completed passes heading into the fourth quarter, and you blow that game because 2 guys who should know better, Alec Ingold and Raheem Mostert, put the ball on the ground and hand them points. I mean, it's really par for the course for the season.
That's where I want to start things. For Tyreek Hill this week, he's been all Tyreek never really does a good job of hiding his emotions, but, you know, he's been through the roof, over the sun, ecstatic, happy that Tua Tagovailoa is back. But, man, when Tyreek Hill says that Tua is all we need, I have to, like, pump my brakes a little bit because there's hope, there's optimism, but the one thing that this team needs to have above all else is urgency. You mentioned those 2 fumbles, man. It's one thing to have Tua back, but we've seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks, a lot of players aren't helping the quarterback either. There's a lot of issues with this team where I don't think we can sit here and just confidently say, Tua's back, like everything's going to go back to, you know, beating the Washington Commanders 45-10 or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned to tune out what Tyreek Hill says anyway. The last 7 things he said have been untrue. So, look, I will say last week I thought Hill and Waddle were getting open, even though they caught 2 passes for 19 yards. Very clearly, that was the game plan to keep everything to the middle of the field, because when Tyler Huntley throws the ball outside the hash marks, things can get pretty bad. So, yeah, I mean, those are 2. Hill and Waddle are 2 obviously big strengths of the team, and they're going to go up against a Cardinals secondary here. We're at cornerback. They've got a struggling Sean Murphy-Bunting coming off a neck injury. They've got Starling Thomas V. They've got the Syracuse kid, Garrett Williams, in the slot. They could take advantage of these matchups here, and you hope that combines with the enthusiasm of Tua coming back to lead to a big scoring day here.
I don't think it, like, I want to temper expectations, but there are so many signs that say Miami should just come out absolutely swinging against this Cardinals defense. They're allowing a 71.3 completion percentage, and just last week, Justin Herbert threw for 350 yards against this defense. And we all, you know, you think about Justin Herbert, the rocket arm, good quarterback, but that's not really been the case this year. So Herbert threw for 350 yards. The week before that, he had 237 against the Broncos. Before that 350 yards is more than double any of his other performances this year. So this Cardinals defense is set up a way where I expect Tua to have some rust, but I mean, it's going to be like Ichiro trying to hit a single. He's just going to be able to slap the ball, I think, all over the field and take what's given to him and make that defense, you know, knock on wood, panic start to finish.
You know, only Justin Herbert could throw for 349 yards and lose the game and scoring 15 points. That's
God.
But yeah, when you look at the Cardinals defense, it is not a good defense. I mean, you mentioned 71.3% completion percentage from opposing quarterbacks. That's worst in the league. They're allowing a quarterback rating of 102 to opposing quarterbacks. So it's a good week for Tua to come back. But also, too, on the ground, the Dolphins are going to be without Zach Sealer in this game because he, of course, got poked in the eye. It just, we can wait.
Speechless.
We can table that. But the Cardinals' entire defensive line from the beginning of the year, Justin Jones, Darius Robinson, and Bilal Nichols, all on injured reserve. So, and Roy Lopez is also going to miss this game, who's their best nose tackle behind there. So the Cardinals are giving up two opposing running backs 5.6 yards a carry. So when you combine 5.6 yards a carry for the Cardinals defense they're allowing to running backs and 102 quarterback rating to quarterbacks, I mean, at home in Miami, all white jerseys, it's got to be a big day for the offense.
Cardinals' worst third down defense, I was listening to the Underdog Fantasy Football Podcast. Arizona forces a 3-and-out on just 11% of their plays. That's 31st in the NFL. They have a very hard time just stringing together 3 solid plays back to back to back. Over the last 2 weeks, we've seen Jonnu Smith get really comfortable in this offense. 12 receptions on 15 targets. Kat, you mentioned it earlier. Tyler Huntley, Snoop Huntley, really took advantage of throwing the ball over the middle of the field. Do we expect Jonnu Smith to continue to be this involved with Tua back in the lineup, or is the offense going to go back to operating in a few different ways?
Yeah, I mean, it expands everything on the offensive side of the ball, and you got to think Waddle and Hill are going to be hungry in this game. Though by the looks of them in the fourth quarter on the sidelines in Indianapolis, and they're losing, they seem pretty thrilled with themselves already. That's a whole different story, but yeah, I mean, this has to be a game where the Dolphins come out swinging. This feels like a game where they're going to put up a lot of points and then hopefully get on a little bit of a run here over the next 4 games. Because if anything is going to happen, it's got to happen now. This is a do or die game. If the Dolphins are 3-4, I saw a stat on this. Historically, 3-4 teams make the playoffs about 19% of the time, which isn't great. If you're 2-5, you make it 6.5% of the time. So do or die, absolutely. This whole thing is over if the Dolphins lose this weekend. It's over. It's draft season. It's free agency. It's cutting this down to the studs. I'm not overreacting when I say that. They're not going to the playoffs, and they have no shot of doing so if they don't win this week.
It's a killer, man. I just keep going to that Colts game because next week you got the Bills, right? There were easy games. I mean, the AFC South, we joke for years, like, why aren't the Dolphins in the AFC South? Why aren't the Dolphins in the AFC South? And it's a damn shame they couldn't have even beaten the teams in the AFC South. There were some major moving pieces or major players who dropped the ball literally for the Dolphins last week. But overall, their success recently has been stringing together a lot of plays on the ground. I think they actually lead the league with a NFL high 65 plays per game. That's 9 more than the Buffalo Bills, who are at a league low. Obviously, things are going to change when you get some home run balls to Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle going downfield. But just based on how this offense has developed over these first 5-6 weeks, how are you hoping to see the running back room start to shake out? Where you have Raheem Mostert looking healthy, obviously the fumble, I mean, you can't have that, but I don't think he's someone you can just bench and say, we're going to take you out of the lineup. How do you see those 3, Jaylen Wright, Raheem Mostert, and De'Von Achane, really starting to unfold when Miami becomes less of this heavy run-oriented team?
My hope is that they've been successful on the ground the last 2 weeks. That's one positive, and that has to. I think they should stick exactly with that. Almost act as if Tua is still out of the lineup in a lot of these situations. I mean, you want to know why the Dolphins actually got a double-digit lead against the Colts last week? It's because they actually didn't not only turn the ball over, but give the team the ball in great field position at all in the first half. I mean, you look at the other games, and if you look at the Bills, Seahawks, Titans, Patriots, and the second half of the Colts game, the Dolphins gave the ball to the opposing team 18 times at their own 42 or better, either because of a turnover, a bad punt, a turnover on downs, a missed field goal. And in the first half against the Colts, they didn't do that. So when they keep it simple, they keep it on the ground, and they play defense, even if they don't string those huge plays together, they can find themselves with a big lead.
I think that's going to be so important too, especially you get that, 14-point advantage, hopefully in the first quarter, and you just, run the football over and over. God, I really don't like doing this specifically, but let's say the Dolphins run 60 plays. They've been averaging 65, and let's say that number goes down with Tua pushing the ball a little bit more. Let's say the Dolphins run 60 plays. How do you see that shaking up between the three running backs in terms of overall touches? I know snaps are a little harder to figure out, but let's say those three running backs, how many touches would you like to see each of them get?
I mean, I think it's Achane, Mostert, Jaylen Wright on the food chart, and I think it's going to stay that way. Yeah, and Mostert and Ingle both fumbled. They were killers. They lost the game, but you can't. You're right. You can't just put them on the bench. You can't weaken yourself with that, because Mostert has looked good, or did look good upon his return. So, yeah, I mean, my hope is that the Dolphins keep the ball on the ground as much as possible, limit the turnovers, because when they do that, the offensive line plays better, the penalties are lower, but sometimes the Dolphins just can't help themselves. And I wonder if Tua coming back is going to force them to revert back into being unable to help themselves.
In a perfect world, I'd love to see maybe like Achane 15 touches, let's say 7 runs, 8 receptions, Mostert around 12, and then right around 8, something like that. Does that sound about right? That'd be half of Miami's offensive snaps or so.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, as long as the three of them are being interchanged regularly, I'm fine. I like all three backs as far as what they can bring on the ground. So, if I don't want Achane to get pounded into the ground. I don't want him being a 25 touch a game guy, which we saw a couple of times earlier this year. And you've got 3 running backs with fresh legs. So just keep doing that throughout the season.
I mentioned Jonnu Smith, but Kat, I don't think anybody is expected that Robbie Chosen through 8 weeks would have more receptions than Odell Beckham Jr. We saw him hit the field against the Colts last week. He's been targeted twice, no receptions. I kind of want to see what he brings to this offense, because I see what Jonnu Smith's doing, and I feel like OBJ will do that slightly better for just the way the Miami Dolphins operate. I look at OBJ not being involved so far, and I also look at Miami being 2 of 15 on 4th down conversions so far this year. 2 of 15. The only 3 teams that have converted less 4th down attempts, I don't have the 3 at the top of my head, they combine 2 for 9 on the year. That's just how bad the Dolphins have been. So, I mean, I don't want to, build too much hope here at a thin air, but I think maybe OBJ combined with Tua is one aspect of this offense we haven't seen yet, and that's maybe a reason for optimism despite the struggles with Tua in the lineup earlier this year.
Well, that's a crazy stat, and I'll give you another one. In the Dolphins' first 6 games of last year compared to the first 6 games of this year, they have the largest points per game drop from one year to the next since 1924. All right? I think it's something like 16 points. It might even be more than that. But anyway, yeah, and I guess I don't share your enthusiasm for Odell Beckham. I thought it was a worthless signing. I thought it at the time. And the guy comes in and suddenly he's hurt out of nowhere, doesn't play half the year. And when he gets in the lineup, he gets 3 targets, drops one of them, and is intercepted on the other. So he's brought nothing to the table. I think Jonnu Smith looked great last week, one of the few players offensively that has looked good over the last couple of weeks. And I think he and Achane need to be your 3rd and 4th guys in the passing game, because they can create those matchups and they add positional versatility, give the defense something to think about. When you just roll out there with 3 undersized receivers, it's kind of obvious what you're doing.
No, that makes a bunch of sense. I mean, the McDaniel experience, man, is just so frustrating, because I see things that are just so damn impressive. I've said this a couple times, but that touchdown to Jonnu Smith, where it was the offense shoots itself in the foot, where Tyler Huntley gets sacked on the 8-yard loss, the 2nd and 2, the most beautiful screen pass where Jonnu Smith is like able to scurry into the end zone. There's got to be something about the OBJ signing. There's got to be at least one play at one point where, like, all right, this is why we did it. It's too early to say he's in the entire helpless category, I'd think. But we also have someone like Eric Ezukama saying make 6'3" wide receivers relevant again or important again. Maybe even just he went with great again. That's something I think the Dolphins desperately need, though. So I agree with you there.
I don't think Eric Ezukama should be making any sayings. He's got one saying now and 3 catches. I don't think that should. I mean, I know. Actually, I feel for the guy. A lot of odd things have happened to Eric Ezukanma. I hope he finds his way on the field. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I do feel overall optimistic about the passing game in this game, even with Tua's rust. And in addition to the whole Cardinals defensive line being out too, Dennis Gardeck, who has been the guy who's been somehow been their best pass rusher for the last couple of years. They seem to sign a free agent and draft somebody in the second or third round to rush the passer every year. And at the end of the year, Dennis Gardeck is their best pass rusher. He's on injured reserve too. So at outside linebacker, they've got Julian Okora, who they picked up off the street, and a guy we probably remember from a few drafts ago, Zaven Collins, at the other outside linebacker spot. So there's not a lot of pass rush happening there. So this should be a game where Tua comfortably sits inside the pocket a little bit more.
Before we switch over to the defense, I did want to talk about the offensive line a little bit. I mean, this has been a brutal offense, less than 12 yards or 12 points per game. They cracked 10 once without Tua. So, I mean, but we entered this year a lot of concern, and Josh and I specifically had Aaron Brewer highlighted as someone we're like, we're not really sure how well he's going to do for this team. But, man, no sacks allowed through 6 games, only 3 pressures allowed. He's been called for 1 penalty. And last week, man, he was absolutely elite as a run blocker with an 87 run block grade. There's scenarios like the Titans game where I think there's just going to be some matchups where he's just going to not be effective whatsoever. But man, when it's a defense that he can get to the second level against, it's a flat out problem, play after play, where he can make something happen.
Yeah, I agree. And Aaron Brewer, it was a signing I was not as high on as other people either, very simply because he's been grading out over the last 2 years as one of the worst pass protecting centers in the NFL. But this is a guy that's come a long way from being an undrafted 6'1", 274-pound kid. He's gotten better every year. And now it looks like he's taken in that next step up. So this is a young ascending player. And if you're looking for things you can hang your hat on this Dolphins roster as they're struggling, Aaron Brewer is definitely one of them. So I hope that continues. Teron Armstead, when he's out in the field, plays at an elite level. I know he's not going to be here forever, but and that's really just looking at the season, the real disappointing thing, right? I said before the year, if the Dolphins are even a B- on offensive line and defensive line, they're going to win 12 or 13 games.
Yep.
And I feel like they have been a B-. And here we're sitting at 2-4.
Man, so many players just hurting this team. It just leaves you absolutely speechless. And it's a killer to me because I think there were the obvious warning signs with Aaron Brewer, how undersized he is. And then how does the thought process work for like Greer and McDaniel, where you have Aaron Brewer, where you identify these traits that we really want in a player and we sign him up and we get him right away? And then you still have guys like Liam Eichenberg in the lineup, who I think he was dealing with some shoulder injuries. He'll be good to go and play at right guard. Just you see the development, you see the growth, you see the vision with some players. And then for some other players, it just seems like they just continue to run into that brick wall. I don't know what it is.
Well, Dolphins haven't been able to get a good offensive guard in the building in 25 years, except for Robert Hunt. I mean, if you look at since, let's say the Dave Wanstead days, let's say 20 years ago, like if Robert Hunt was the best guard you've had in the last 20 years, who's number 2? Like you would really have to scratch your head about that. I mean, John Jerry,
Incognito?
Yeah, Incognito. Okay, Incognito I forgot about. So those 2. And then you would really have to struggle to find the third guy. So, yeah, and the Dolphins, look, there's some spots they chose to go weaker at because they had to. Eichenberg doesn't cost anything. Robert Jones doesn't cost anything. But, damn, you kind of wish the Dolphins had a few more extra 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks over the last 3 or 4 years instead of lighting them on fire. Because they might have been able to come away with a decent starter.
1 extra first-round pick would have been absolutely lovely on that offensive line. I'll tell you that for sure.
It's something that got a lot of heat. It was, and I didn't think it was a very controversial comment, was Penei Sewell should have been drafted over Jaylen Waddle 3 years ago now. I think that's pretty easy to say at this point. Sewell, who I did want over Waddle at the time, one of the best tackles in football. Jaylen Waddle laughing on the sidelines on a 2-4 team with 1 catch. So, hey, look, Jaylen Waddle, not taking away his first 3 years. One of the only players in NFL history with 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. But, yeah, I think that's a mistake in retrospect.
There's a leap to say that Sewell was the right pick, and then I think people are instantly taking that and assuming you're saying that Jaylen Waddle's a bust. I think that's where the mindset instantly snaps to. But like when you think about what's happened over the first 6 games of the season, you have a better offensive line and just like a 6'3", not exactly Preston Williams, but just some guy out there with a big body, and he can be a hungry hippo and catch a couple balls. If a quarterback has 3.2 seconds and compared to this maximized, super efficient Tua offense that only needs 2.2 seconds, the offensive lineman makes a lot more sense. But the Dolphins, they just wanted to push all their chips into the table with the speed. We only need the 2.2 seconds for Tua. We're not trying to make it more. No, I completely agree with you that I think the offense at its peak wouldn't look as good with a Penei Sewell because Jaylen Waddle can take you to that next level to score 21 points against Baltimore in the fourth quarter. But on a game-to-game basis, when you need a Tim Boyle in the lineup, when you need a Tyler Huntley in the lineup, who the second he breaks the pocket, he starts to panic a little bit, having a better offensive line keeps him in the pocket a little bit longer. I don't think that's too outrageous whatsoever.
Yeah, and one question that would need to be asked is would the Dolphins have signed Teron Armstead if Penei Sewell had been drafted? Probably not. So because they did have Austin Jackson, who they invested a high pick in, probably weren't going to have all 3 of those guys in the same building. So we can go down that rabbit hole on or two, but. Yeah, I mean, Jaylen Waddle has had an incredibly disappointing season. Obviously, we know the root cause of a lot of that. Tua's coming back this week. Hopefully, we see him bust loose for another long one.
They scored a passing touchdown last week, Kat. I'm just trying to think here. I'm trying to put out a fair over-under. 2.5 touchdowns for the offense, over-under.
It's Friday. I'm going to go over.
Dare I ask 3.5?
That might be pushing. I'm going to say they'll score. I'm going to say they'll score 4 touchdowns. They're going to score 31 points.
I like that.
I predicted them to win last week, so don't take it too seriously.
Something that needs to be taken seriously is this Miami Dolphins defense. I can't figure this unit out, man. They have no pass rush. They barely play with the lead. And they're one of the best. They are the best unit in the NFL on third down. They play so well together. They aren't really strong-arming opposing offenses. Opposing offenses are able to run what they want. And yet the Dolphins are saying, all right, we'll still figure out a way to stop you. It's been pretty impressive. And I don't want you to start with saying that it's been Will Levis and Anthony Richardson.
Well, it has been. No, but look, the defense is overall playing well. I mean, they're allowing 4.76 yards a carry to opposing running backs, which isn't great. They're not perfect. They've played some poor quarterbacks. They've played largely behind this season for the most part. I think that all factors into it, but they've got good players on defense. I mean, Sealer, it's a shame he's going to miss this game. But Sealer, Calais Campbell's playing like a monster. Jordan Brooks is playing really well. Emmanuel Ogbah has had a resurgence. Javon Holland should be back this game, albeit with a clubbed hand. And at the cornerback spot, I think Kader Kohu has looked much better in this defense. Jalen Ramsey and Kendall Fuller on the outside. It's a veteran defense, but I think it's a really good defense, and I think we found finally the right defensive coordinator in Anthony Weaver. So there's a lot to be excited about on that side of the ball. We just have to have the balance, the running game, and cutting back on the penalties and cutting back on the turnovers that can help out. I mean, this offense has been largely unplayable this year.
It's crazy how we had Zach Sealer get his helmet popped off as he's diving on the ground to recover a fumble. Comes out of the comes out of the pile looking like just a Spartan, just conquered the war, all that kind of And then you have him poked in the eye, and he's not going to play on Sunday. It's just the turn of events with this team, man, just leaves you so speechless. How do you overcome something like that when you had 2 guys in the middle, Sealer and Campbell, specifically Sealer, who's just out there every play as the anchor of your defense? How do you work around that?
So last year, Jerome Baker goes on IR after two guys run into each other against the Commanders. This year, Jalen Phillips tears a ligament thanks to Jordan Poyer. And now Zach Sealer gets poked in the eye in practice by his own player and is going to miss a game that you need to win. I mean, these people spend enough time kicking us in the nuts. They spend all practice and games doing it to each other too.
Oh my God, man! I wish I had the words to put together like the proper reaction here. So you have Emmanuel Ogbah coming back. He's been dealing with a bicep injury. He was limited. Calais Campbell didn't practice early in the week. That was a rest day. Cap, I haven't given up hope on him yet, but I remember how excited you were for Chop Robinson on draft night. A very tough hand. He was supposed to be a pass rush specialist early in his career. Been forced into a role that he hasn't had to play in. When you see him line up against Kyler Murray in this offense, how do you feel that he can really be a difference maker on Sunday?
Yeah, my opinion right now is he can't, because he hasn't shown it yet. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, I expected. That's one thing Anthony Weaver has not had a grasp on. Now, Chop Robinson's not playing well either. I mean, last week against Anthony Richardson, he's got him wrapped up, and Richardson breaks away and gets 12 yards. Didn't play very well the rest of the game either after Robinson had a promising game against the Patriots. So, hey, he's only 7 games into his NFL career, but you don't draft a player like that with that type of speed off the edge at a specific position of need to develop for a couple of years down the road. So it's been a very disappointing start for him and an otherwise really good defense.
The Dolphins have no pass rush and are 26th in the league in quarterback hits. Watching the Cardinals from afar as a fantasy football guy, you think this is an absolute powerhouse team. Michael Wilson on the outside, he really picked it up last year. Greg Dortch is a very strong slot receiver, I believe. And then you add Marvin Harrison Jr. to the mix. You have Trey McBride, who has over 50 receiving yards in each of the 3 weeks. James Conner was the team's leading receiver, and he's one of the most underrated running backs in the league. And I know I'm just kind of ranting here, Cap, but how do you slow down an offense that has a lot of playmakers? The Dolphins are 26th in the league in quarterback hits, and Kyler Murray has been sacked just once over the last 3 games.
Yeah, they've got some good players on offense. I mean, I'll come back to regret these words. I'm sure I've always viewed Kyler Murray as the most overrated player in the league. I'm not a huge fan of him. He's okay. He's also been either hurt or largely ineffective over the last 2 years, given that they've been 4-13 each of the last 2 years, and they're 3-4 this year. I mean, that doesn't sound like star quarterback production to me. And you look at 4 of the last 5 games, the Cardinals haven't scored over 17 points. Now, I do like and have a lot of respect for the rest of their offense. James Conner, like you said, somebody who feels like he's been around forever. And every time fantasy football draft comes around each year, I always end up putting him lower than everybody for some reason. But then you look up and, wow, the guy's got 4.6 yards a carry, over 500 rushing yards in the year, averaging almost 100 total yards a game. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is maybe he hasn't broken through like a lot of people thought he was, but he's still a star in the making. And Trey McBride has 96 catches over the last 16 games dating back to last year. So one of the best tight ends in the league that a lot of people don't talk about as much because he plays with Arizona. So and their offensive line, even though Paris Johnson had to flip from right tackle to left tackle when Jonah Williams went down, they still have Kelvin Beachum, the veteran at right tackle. So it's not a great offensive line, but it's a good offensive line. So this is a tougher matchup than the Dolphins have seen on defense the last couple of weeks. And let's see if they respond at home and hold this Arizona Cardinals team below 17 points like they have for the last 5 weeks.
The Dolphins allow the second highest yards after contact, and that could be a problem against a dynamic runner like James Conner. I think a lot of that has to do when you're facing someone like Anthony Richardson. God, it seemed like they had him wrapped up in the backfield 4 or 5 times last week, breaks away, all of a sudden, 15 yards the other way, something like that. But I'm actually excited to see an offense that's going to stretch out this Miami Dolphins secondary and see how the Dolphins kind of react to that. Jalen Ramsey led the team in pressures last week, Kat. Do you see him being more of that star weapon this week, or are you going to have him following around someone like Marvin Harrison, who he hasn't had the production, but, he had one big game with 2 touchdowns where, you can't leave him alone or on an island because he can take advantage of you that way.
Yeah, if you're not moving around Jalen Ramsey, at least somewhat, you're doing it wrong. And we saw so last week. I don't expect him to blitz as much this week simply because Anthony Richardson is so inexperienced you could just blindside him. And that almost happened a couple times last week. Kyler Murray, I think, is a little bit more aware on that. So you may this defense looks like it does a pretty decent job of just kind of encapsulating quarterbacks inside the pocket despite their mobility. So I expect him to be a little creative, but not quite as blitz heavy or creative as last week with Ramsey.
Kat, you're always very grounded, and you do a good job of reeling us in. Am I just kind of being too salty, too over the top? One of the most annoying plays for me last week was Jordan Poyer. It was like a fastball from Anthony Richardson. Jordan Poyer was down with the linebackers in his own defense, and it looked like ball went right through his hands. Where you're like, man, Jordan Poyer, even 2 years ago, catches that. That's just one of those signings where I feel like you're hoping Poyer do something, Poyer make a play, because he's been that through his entire career with the Bills. Even if he doesn't have an interception, I think he had over 100 tackles last season. He was a star, a cornerstone of that defense, and man, it just seems like he's half a second late whenever you need him to be Jordan Poyer.
Yeah, he hasn't been good this year, and he's one of the few players. To me, David Long, and Chop Robinson have been the three problems on defense. Maybe Benito Jones hasn't been great, but you kind of knew what to expect from him.
Yeah.
I think the rest of the defense has been good. I mean, really good. Those to me are have been the weaknesses. And yeah, I mean, it just as a whole on the Dolphins team. I mean, you get into the second half of these games, and you just see play after play where the guy does not step up. Dropped interceptions, fumble by Alec Ingle, fumble by Raheem Mostert. Anthony Richardson squirms away 3 times when you should have him in the backfield. Jason Sanders puts a 52-yard field goal off the post, and you go from it being a tie ball game to the Colts are up with not too much time left, and they're up 3 points with the ball.
What would you have done in that situation? What would you have the Sanders field goal attempt? That's been a debate on the Twitter streets. What would you have done there?
Made the field goal.
You would have gone for the field goal though. That you think that was the choice?
Yeah, I would have been fine either way. I was not upset with the decision. A field goal, 50-something yards, and Sanders has had more success from there lately than he had when he was slumping back in 2021 and 2022. That gives you the tie. But on the other hand, if you do get a yard, you're really in the driver's seat to not only either hit the field goal or drive for the touchdown. And even if you don't convert it, your defense has played very well all game. So I could see it going either way. So I don't have a huge problem with the decision. You got to go back too and say, look at how ineffective the Dolphins have been on fourth down this year.
Yep.
I wonder if that factored in too. Because earlier in the year, Mike McDaniel didn't see a fourth down. He didn't want to go for it. Now it's 4th and 1. You're down by 3 in a game. You've got to win. Yeah, I can understand why some fans are frustrated with that.
The last question I have about the defense here, specifically in the secondary, Kader Kohu, he missed practice Wednesday, Thursday with a neck injury. I don't think he's going to play. And Storm Duck, he's dealing with an ankle injury, did not practice Wednesday and Thursday. Who would you like to see in that slot cornerback spot? Not only did Miami activate Cam Smith off injured reserve, I think Saran Neal was another name that was mentioned playing slot corner. Obviously, Nick Needham still in the mix. Who should be the lead horse?
I want to see Cam Smith on the outside, and I want to see Jalen Ramsey playing more of the slot. That's my preference. I don't want to see Cam Smith lined up with Marvin Harrison Jr. all game, but come on, man. If you can't cover Greg Dortch or Michael Wilson, I mean, I'm not saying they're bad players, but look, they're 3rd, 4th receivers in this league. If you can't step up and not get trampled on by those two dudes, first game back or not, that's not a good sign.
Cam Smith's ability to play outside, do you think that could have the defense looking even better than it has in recent weeks? Again, we have to preface everything by saying that go through the list of the quarterbacks the Dolphins have faced. But I just think having that boundary presence like Cam Smith, just giving Jalen Ramsey more availability, I wonder if we haven't seen the ceiling of this group just yet.
Maybe not, and you can never have enough good cornerbacks. I know that's a cliche, but it actually does mean something to me at the cornerback position when throughout the year you tend to see 7, 8, 9 players have meaningful snaps. I don't know if it'll change the defense that much because you've had Kader Kohu and Storm Duck out there. I think the depth has been pretty decent, but Yeah, I mean, Cam Smith, you drafted in the second round with high upside, and he's still a young player. He just needs to get on the field and get his licks. I'm looking forward to seeing him play.
Sunday, Hard Rock Stadium, hoping for a mix of urgency and optimism when Tua Tagovailoa leads the team back out into the field. Kat, how are we feeling about the game? Let me hear that prediction. Maybe a key player. I know it's so hard. I wanted to ask you who's going to step up, but when you have Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill combined for 2 targets or 2 receptions in the past games, it's kind of an easy answer.
So I don't think I could go a show last year without pointing out that when the Dolphins were favored by 4 or more points, there was a string, I think, of 17 consecutive games that they won, dating back to like the 2021 season. That all came crashing down in the Monday night game against the Titans. Or else I'd be talking about possibly 19 in a row here when they're favored by 4 or more points. They're favored by exactly 4. I was going to predict a Dolphins loss here, but when that climbed from 3.5 to 4, that gave me a sign. I'm going to go 31-21 Dolphins. Jaylen Waddle with his first touchdown catch of the year on the first drive.
First catch of the year on the first drive. Wow.
First touchdown catch of the year on the first drive, yeah.
So we get a Stephen Ross Waddle? Is that what you're saying?
Don't dance. I don't want to see. I don't want to see anybody dancing or even smiling throughout this game. 2 and 4 teams don't get to laugh, dance, or smile. Like, go in there and take care of business.
Dude, I love that. That should be the slogan for the week. I hope you tweet that. 2 and 4 teams don't get to smile, because that's the thing about like the Tyreek Hill message and like everything's back to normal. No, it's not back to normal. You're too that urgency needs to be first and foremost. That's why I'm gonna even say God, I'd love to see 31-13. Just step on their throats. Show up meaning business. You have Arizona traveling all the way to Hard Rock Stadium. It's going to be outside. Get that 10-point lead, get that 17-point lead, and then just run out the clock. Kat, this was an absolute blast. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. If you're liking what you're listening to, you can find the show on wherever you get your podcasts. And please, if you have a moment, leave a review. That stuff helps others find the show, and we always appreciate that. Thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. Go have a great weekend. Let's hope we get to talk about a victory Monday. And most importantly, fins up. Fins up.